everybody, we're going to get started on this. Looks like the weather's cooperating. Hopefully no chip seal this week. And it'll be a good program. So I want to welcome you to our fifth forum and lecture for the 2015 season. We're starting the downhill slide now. We're half done. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Terry Clark. I'm the Executive Director of the Sawtooth Interpretive and Historical Association, and we're the sponsors of the forum and lecture series. As always, I need to begin by thanking our primary sponsors, the people that support us and give us the means to pull off all our programs. Redfish Lake Lodge, Idaho Rocky Mountain Ranch, the Sawtooth Society, the Val A. Browning Foundation, the Sawtooth National Recreation Area, and the Atlantic Philanthropies. CHA is a member-based nonprofit 501c3 organization. Our mission is to protect and advance the natural and cultural history of Idaho's Sawtooth Salmon River Country through preservation and education. Our programs are funded by book and map sales at our sales outlets, like here at the museum and at Redfish, donations, grants, and memberships. And we hope that if you like our programs, you'll consider supporting us by making a donation over here in the Sawtooth Bowl tonight, or by becoming a member. We've got some membership envelopes over there as well. All of you who are currently members of CHA, would you please raise your hand so your friends can get in line? All right. So thank you all for being members, and thank you for coming tonight. Tonight's program, I think, is going to be a lot of fun. I think we're going to hear some tall tales and maybe some true tales as well. We thought that based on the popularity of our then and now talk from wilderness rangers John Rember and Katie Nelson last year, that it would be kind of fun to do the same kind of thing, but focusing on then and now as a game warden. We have an even further back then in the audience, so I'm sure Dale will chip in on that. So anyway, we thought this would be fun. Let us know if we were right. And with that, I'm going to turn over the introduction of our speakers to Thea Lincoln. She's our historic specialist here at the museum.
First of all, thank you so much for coming, everyone. I'm always really grateful and glad to see familiar faces and unfamiliar ones, too. I see why they put me in charge of this, because of the story things, I see. So, a little bit more about this wonderful gentleman, Mr. Gary. He has devoted his entire life to working with fish and wildlife. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Wildlife Fisheries Resources, which he got in 1975. And a Master's of Science in Wildlife Management, which he got in 1972, which he got both of those degrees, 77, sorry, 77, which he got from University of Idaho. He started his career with the Forest Service in the Salmon National Forest, and in 1979 he became a game warden for Idaho Fish and Game Forest Stanley, wonderful place to be. For 28 years, his patrol area has included the SNRA, the Sawtooth SNRA, and the southern half of the Frank Church Wilderness. He's done field studies on fisher, lynx, and wolverine. He also has worked with bat, small carnivores, lions, and bears. Oh my. And he's also earned lots of recognition as the Idaho Conservation Officer of the Year in 1984 and 1993. He retired at Halloween 2005. Halloween. But he still is very active in this community and also in conservation in this area. He also has received the Bethune Church Award for service to the Sawtooth National Recreation Area in 2004, joining his wife Lori, who received the award in 2003. And he has lived here for 36 years. Okay, a little bit more about Zach over here. He grew up as the son of a park ranger, and then you turned game warden in rural Iowa. Sorry. That's what they all say. Just listen to the news. Well, no. He joined the Iowa National Guard right out of high school and was deployed to Iraq twice and Afghanistan once. He has an Associate of Arts from the Southwestern Community College in Creston, Iowa, and a Bachelor's in Conservation and Management from Upper Iowa University in Fayette, Iowa. He's worked for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources as a seasonal park aide and as a water patrol officer for Iowa DNR on the Mississippi River. He was hired as a conservation officer in Idaho fishing game in August 2012 and has been stationed in Stanley since then. Zach is an Idaho Air National Guard and has just returned from Qatar? Correct?
Guitar.
Cutter.
Qatar. Okay. Starts with a Q, ends with an R.
There's a lot of sand.
Things and stuff, right? So thank you very much for listening to my introduction, and have a wonderful time listening to these excellent speakers.
Well, it's an honor to do this today because I've always got stories, and I usually share them with one person at a time, maybe two persons at a time, but it's great to see you all. Can you hear me okay?
Better with the mic, Gary.
Say what?
Better with the mic.
Yeah, well, that's enough, Mike. Anyway, the life of a conservation officer in the early days was a labor of love and a lifestyle, not just a job. That lifestyle and that love was accepted and committed to by my very special wife, Lori, and my family. And that's why I've lasted here for 36 years, because prior to me coming, only one officer in the last 50 years stayed 3 years. And that's pretty amazing. I stayed 28 years, but because I loved every minute of it. Just a little bit about me before Idaho Fish and Game. I had interrupted career goals. In high school, made a commitment in my mind and on paper that I wanted to be either a game warden or a forest ranger. That's what my high school dream was. However, I had a hobby in electronics. So my dad said, I don't want you to be a lumberjockey. I don't want you to just be a logger. I mean, that's what he was thinking. That's all it amounted to. So I went to school in electrical engineering and got a degree in electrical engineering before I ever went in the service and before I ever started over again in wildlife. So my dream was realized when I got hired by the Forest Service and found that that was way too big of a bureaucracy for me. And so I bailed out of the Forest Service in a year, went to work with Idaho Fish and Game, and stayed there for 28 years here in Stanley. So that's just kind of my story up to this point. Now I would like Zach to tell his story up to a point of...
All right. We good?
Yeah, great.
Perfect. So, like Gary said, it's definitely a lifestyle. It's not a job. A couple of my neighbors are here, and they'll tell you that I leave the house at 4 in the morning, and sometimes I come home at 4 in the morning. So, the phone rings nonstop, and it's definitely a lifestyle. Thankfully, or fortunately, I knew what I was getting into because I grew up living the lifestyle. So, my dad was a park ranger. Park rangers in Iowa are different from park rangers out here. They're fully certified peace officers. They're basically a game warden that works in the park during the summer and then kind of goes and does game warden stuff during the fall and winter. So I knew what I was getting into. Then my dad became a supervisor for the game wardens, and now he is the chief for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources for their law enforcement bureau. So that's part of the reason I didn't get a job in Iowa, because I wanted to make my own name for myself. And as I worked there as a water patrol, just a seasonal officer, I would hear other seasonal guys say the only reason you got this is because of your dad. And I had to inform them that that wasn't the case, and I paid my way through school, and I went overseas 3 times to get that done, and got set back a few years in school. And so, anyway, I was pretty close to giving up. I got hired on full-time with the Guard, and as a airplane mechanic, liked it quite a bit. I had a great schedule. I worked 4 10-hour days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday off, and I made over $30 an hour. Wow. It was a good job. However, we lost our airplanes, and I knew I wanted to be a game warden, and I didn't have the passion on working on airplanes as I do with this. So, Idaho had openings, I applied, flew out here, and here I am. So, it's been good, and I look forward to many more years here. I obviously have quite a precedents set ahead of me that I don't know. 2 years of being game warden of the year, that's pretty impressive. So anyway, we'll go back to Gary.
Okay. Well, when I first started with the department, I was down in Jerome, and I was desperate to get up into the Salmon River country, and I was notified when I was down in Jerome that a position had come open in Chalice. So I right away applied to get a transfer to Chalice. And I interviewed for the Chalice position, and my supervisor down in Jerome told the supervisor in Idaho Falls, you can't have him. We want to keep him here in Jerome. And so when I returned down there and got that message from the supervisor in Idaho Falls, I went into the supervisor's office in Jerome and pounded on his desk and almost on his chest and said, don't you ever screw with my career again. He goes, well, Gary, we don't want you to go. And I go, I want to go. And so I got a little frustrated. I called the assistant director of Idaho Fish and Game, and at that time, Bob Salter, who I was friends with because I had taken the fish and game testing 3 times. He was always in those days on the board for testing. And Bob Salter said, Gary, the very next job that comes open, it's yours. And somehow I got really lucky. The conservation officer that was here in Stanley was a party boy, and he didn't want to be a CO. He wanted to be a fisheries biologist. The regional supervisor in Idaho Falls fired him, and the director called me and said, would you like to go to Stanley? And I said, I'm out the door. And I have never looked back. So that's how I got here in Stanley, and I drug Lori out of a high-paying job, being paid better than me down at Health and Welfare in Twin Falls, but I didn't take this job for money at all. I never did and never would have. But it was really fun to show up for the job in Stanley. It was in July of '79. Butch Welch is the one who got the Chalice job a couple weeks ahead of me getting Stanley. Well, in the summertime, Stanley was busy even back then. Not as busy as it is now, but it was pretty busy. Butch Welch was working here in Stanley the day that I moved in and was moving into the house in Lower Stanley. An actual Indian game warden from the Chauvin tribe helped us unload the moving gear, because I moved myself with a horse trailer, but an Indian game warden from Fort Hall helped me unload, and the conservation officers that were up here were pretty busy. And Butch Welch was busy out at Stanley Lake shooting a bear with a tranquilizer in the top of a tree. He shot it in the top of the tree, it promptly went to sleep, fell out of the tree to the ground. He had a bear trap there, because that's what you do when you have one tranquilized. Butch had people all around. He said, oh, the bear is fine. Help me load it into the trap to haul it off. Well, the bear was very dead. They took it out to the redfish cabin across from the hatchery, and they skinned it out because our department always keeps good capes, and because they were sellable in the fall auction. Well, not knowing any better, the COs, other than me, hauled the bear carcass to the Stanley dump. And Jack Neese was the manager of the Stanley dump at that time. He went out there and found that, one, they had a key and unlocked the dump, took it in there and put it in the dump. He called me, the new CO, and chewed me up one side and down the other. And he says, you get out there and you get that bear carcass out of the dump right now. Mind you, that was a very hot summer day. And that bear that had been put in there the day before was greasy, slimy, slippery, gross, and I had to load it in my truck and haul it off and put it out in the sticks rather than in the dump. But that's how I started the job here, was getting a bear carcass out of the dump. That was a pretty gross initiation. So back to that.
Can you top that? Yeah.
There we go. So yeah, my coming to Stanley wasn't quite that adventurous, but so anyway, I got hired. They said, here's a map, here's some openings we got, where do you want to go? I'd never been to Idaho before, the closest I'd been was Colorado, and so I said, well geez, I don't know, And I kind of looked around and I said, well, Jerome probably wouldn't be too bad. Thank God that didn't happen. And here I am. So, yeah, I showed up, and I think it was shortly after I got hired. Gary actually called me, and I still need to pay you back for this one. There was a dead cow elk, and you can see the orange post down there. And it was down off that side of that ditch. Well, it had been there for probably 4 or 5 days. And it was stinky. You could smell it clear up here. So I show up, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get this thing out of there. And so I hooked the winch up to it, tried to winch it into the back of the truck, and it just kept sliding along the ditch. And before too long, I got my lights on so people will go around me, but they start stacking up behind me, and they're watching me. And I'm like, well, I guess it's time to get on YouTube. So I hopped in the truck, and I put it in drive, and I drug the cow elk out of the road, or out of the ditch, and drove it down the road here, and finally got it loaded in the back of the truck. There were 2 motorcycles that did drive by, and they had their little helmet cameras on. They drove by, got up here to the bridge, turned around, drove back by. They were both looking at me, and then spun around and came back by again. So I'm sure there's a video of me out there somewhere dragging the dead stinking elk down the highway. So yeah, Gary still loves me. We'll settle up sometime.
It was stinking for the Mormon lecture series. So we needed it out of here. There are people that remember.
It was. It absolutely was. And it was there for 5 days.
So back to my first week on the job. My district supervisor was Brent Nyborg, a really nice fellow. Brent said, here's your truck keys and here's your ticket book. Go to work. And he'd return to Salmon. And I'm 119 miles from Salmon. That's where my supervisor was. And it wasn't until January of that coming year that I went to the Post Academy to be certified as a peace officer and be fully legal to do the things that we do. But I was still writing tickets aplenty that first fall, and it was a really busy time, and I began learning the area and everything. But before fall even came, I had the salmon poachers to deal with, because the season had closed in '78. That was the last of the salmon seasons until recent years. So in '79, I was working salmon poachers. And I have one particular story about the salmon poachers that I think was pretty good. I'll get to that a little bit later. But while I mentioned the Post Academy, I was gone for 9 weeks. And my wife has a brand new baby born in August. And I left in January, and the temperatures plummeted to 59 below zero while I was gone. The plumbing in the Stanley house, not only did it freeze up, but it froze up alternately between hot and cold being frozen. And my wife had to deal with that. She didn't really not know too many people here in the valley, so she called the Forest Service. Steve Lippis and Bill James, bless their hearts, came and thawed out the water for her so she could do diapers and whatever else you need to do with a few months old baby. So while I was gone having fun at Pocatello in the wintertime, she was really having fun here. With cars that wouldn't start, snow blowers that wouldn't start. The snowblower started easy for me, but it was a big old clunky snowblower, and she couldn't pull it out and hold on the throttle at the same time, so she had to have people come and help her start the snowblower, because back in those days we got a lot of snow. It's not the way it is anymore. We used to get a lot of snow.
My snowblower, you plug it in and push a button. And I also have the hatchery folks to clean out my driveway for me, so I don't have to use it all that often. It's pretty handy. So thanks to those guys. Gary mentioned the salmon season stuff. Salmon seasons have just started picking up. We've had 2 consecutive ones in the last 2 years. It's been a while in between that we didn't have one, so it's starting to bring a lot more fishermen back into the valley and stuff, which is great. However, it's very busy, and I don't get much done other than checking salmon fishermen. So with that, is a kind of funny story about salmon fishing that I'll share with you guys that happened this year. And I call this, it pays to be aware of your surroundings, and you'll understand why here in a minute. So I got a phone call about a white gentleman fishing right at the weir at the hatchery. So I hurry, run down there, and I sneak up along the shoreline and I start taking pictures, and he is literally from me to the front row away from the weir, fishing away. And he walks over next to his tackle box because he broke a line off and starts re-rigging. Well, literally right above his head is a sign that says, "Absolutely no fishing for the yards at the weir." So I made sure to take a picture of that. I walked up and said, "Hey sir, State Game Warden, how's fishing going today?" And he says, "It is awesome fishing out there." I said, "Yeah, it probably is." So you got the whole 100 yards to the river, I hear, yourself. "Yeah." I said, "So have you caught anything?" Yeah, I sure have. I caught 2 steelhead and 1 really big trout. I just let that lie for a minute. I said, "Okay, well, I guess I'll take a look at your fishing license." So he pulls his permits out. He says, "So, on them steelhead, do I need to notch my card?" I said, "Well, if there were a steelhead season open, if there were steelhead in the river at this time of year, yeah, you would. But neither of those are the case, so, you got your fish down there on the stringer?" "Yeah." And he goes, "If they're not steelhead, they must be really big trout." And I said, "Okay, well, let's go look at your fish." So we walked down to the river, and he pulls the stringer up, and I said, "You're right, they are really big trout." So you got any idea what kind of trout they are? Rookies? Nope.
Oh, no.
Any other guesses? Well, it's got to be a brown then. Nope. Well, what the hell is it? I said, "Well, those are 2 bull trout."
Oh, no.
He says, "Bull trout? Never heard of such a thing." They're a federally protected species, and lucky for you, they're on a metal stringer and they might survive. So we'll see what happens here. So I popped the 2 bull trout off the stringer, revived them. They swam off, happy. And I said, "Well, things are looking up for you, because the fish are still alive." She said, "Now this 3rd one here, do you have any idea what that is?" "Well, that's got to be the brown." I said, "Well, there aren't brown trout up in this part of the state, so it's not a brown trout." "Could it be a brookie?" No, sir, it's not a brookie either. What you have is a Jack Chinook salmon." "Oh, well, I thought one of them might have been a salmon. Am I going to be able to keep it?" So, where'd you catch it at? "Right here." "Okay, no, you can't keep it." "Well, why not?" I said, "Well, didn't you see that big sign up there above your head?" "Oh, no, I didn't." Okay. So I took that one off the stringer, and it swam away instantly. So I said, "Well, did you come up, when you walked up here," I said, "did you walk through the willows, or did you come up along the river?" He says, "Well, I came up along the river, and I thought it was kind of weird nobody was fishing up here, but I don't know, I started catching fish right away, and I don't know what I'm doing. I got a buddy that's supposed to help me, and he's drunk and hungover and in the camper at Redfish, and so I just thought I'd come down and see what I could do." I said, "So you did walk along the river?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, let's walk back down the river. Go ahead and gather up your things." And so he picks his stuff up, and we walked down the river to the 100-yard marker. And I said, "So you walked right by this sign, huh?" And he looks in and goes, "Well, I'll be damned. I guess it pays to be aware of your surroundings." So, long story short, the gentleman was from Utah. I ended up writing the citation for fishing in the closure, and then I gave him 3 warnings for possession of the bull trout and then possession of this salmon that he caught in the closure. He had to come drive back, so he had to take a day off from work, drive all the way back from Utah to go visit the judge in Custer County in Chalice. Ended up paying roughly a little over $200 and some in fines. So it hit the pocketbook pretty hard when you figure the gas and the day off work and the drive. And so anyway, that's my one quick little salmon story. Yeah, go ahead. If I were not able to release those fish, and he probably would have gotten cited for those as well. But since they were still alive and doing fine, I went with that option because it was quite obvious that this guy had no clue on what he was doing, where he was, and what he had. So I do have a heart.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if I can top that, but I might be able to come close. Back in '79, when the salmon season was still going on, I had the pleasure of being able to ride my dirt bike where nobody basically alive today could do, and that was I rode to the big hole on the middle fork of the salmon with my dirt bike to check poachers, and I also rode my dirt bike to the mouth of Loon Creek on Loon Creek in the middle fork because the Wilderness Act wasn't in place yet. And at that time, there were a number of people when it was fishing legal that did ride their dirt bikes down to those areas. Well, there wasn't any fishing legal in '79, so I rode down there and busted the fishermen that were down there fishing illegally. And the very next year, it's all closed, and I still got to bust people for going into the wilderness with their dirt bikes because, and ironically, this guy was pretty illiterate on fish, but ironic, back in those days, most of the salmon poachers were from Utah. That's absolute truth. Most of the poachers were from Utah. But I have to tell a local salmon fishing story that's really kind of good to me, for me, was we used to sit in the bushes out in Marsh Creek at night and watch for the salmon poachers because when it closed, there was still fish, but it wasn't legal to fish for them. So officers from all over the region and even over in Idaho Falls area, because my region went into that area back in those days, they came from all those areas to work here in the summer because salmon poaching was a big deal and it was a big violation. So myself and Russ Kozak had the night duty one night in early July out in Marsh Creek. So we're laying out there in the bushes waiting and watching in the dark for someone to show up. And the old Marsh Creek cutoff road that used to go from Thatcher Creek over to the old guard station, we're out there in the bushes because it's a real popular salmon poaching spot. We're out there in the bushes and along comes this vehicle just bouncing along on the dirt road that goes out there because it's really, even in the late 70s, it was really only a sheep trail. The sheep herders used more than the public. So this rig comes bouncing along and Russ and I are just licking our chops going, we've got somebody coming in here to fish. Well, lo and behold, two guys get out of this pickup with gas poles, and back then what they used is it looked kind of like a Native American spear, but it wasn't. It was a three-pronged fork, and the prongs were only about that far apart. These guys got out with those spears, and we could see them in the dark, and we saw them the best when they opened the door of the vehicles and the dome light was on. So the two guys got out with their spears, and there were plenty of fish on the shallow water there. So we're just watching and watching and watching, and they spear a fish, they take it up, throw it in the back of the pickup, they go back out, they spear another fish, they go back, dump it in the back of the pickup, and Russ says, "This is enough." And so Russ Kozak is a pretty macho guy. He was a collegiate wrestler and a brute of a guy. So Russ goes, "Gary, you go around that way where that guy is, and I'm going to go around this way and where this guy is." And Russ, being the guy that he is, the guy is right about to spear one, and he grabs him by the shoulders. It's kind of like right here. He grabs the guy by the shoulder and puts a grab on him and says, "Idaho Game Warden, you're under arrest." And the gentleman did urinate his pants. He did urinate his pants because he was definitely in no way knowing there was anyone out there. So we had to deal with these two guys, and of course we cited them, and they had illegal fish, and we took them to court and all that. And the one guy was, because he's not anymore, I can say this, He was the mail driver between Stanley and Chalice. He did the mail run day in and day out. And he had mud on his face for several years because the word got around to everybody that the mailman was poaching salmon and poaching. So that was a pretty fun one, but watching Russ Kozak at work was amazing. The other guy got off much easier. He didn't have to pee his pants. Zach's turn.
So Gary mentioned